Welcome, everyone, to BDD Workshop number 5, Expanding Your Self-Identity. First, I want to remind everyone that, yes, you are worthy of love. I know that last week we talked a lot about negative core beliefs and the negative core beliefs that people with BDD have about themselves, such as, I am ugly, I am worthless, I am unlovable. Some really, really negative core beliefs. But I want you to know that you can counter those negative core beliefs and you can believe that, yes, you are lovable and yes, you are worthy of love. That's where I want to start today, by really reminding everyone here that you are worthy of love. You are a person and you are a kind, compassionate, nice person who truly is worthy of love. Today, we're going to talk about expanding your self-identity and developing a new, more positive self-identity. I want to remind everyone what we learned about our negative core beliefs impacting everyone and everything around us in our lives. That also goes for the opposite. When we develop a more positive self-identity, which is shown by this diagram here showing this little smiley face with arrows shooting out from the center, it goes to show that when we develop a more positive self-identity, that also impacts everything in our lives. It affects our relationships with other people, it affects the actions we take, and it affects how we feel about ourselves. It can also combat those negative inner critic voices and the negative core beliefs that you discovered in week 4. So I really want to remind you that doing this work is really important because it impacts everything in your life, and developing a more positive self-identity will really have a large effect, not only on overcoming your BDD symptoms, but also on moving your life forward in a much more positive way. I wanted to share a little something showing my self-identity when I had BDD. I often describe this pie chart to people when I'm telling my story. So it was really fun to be able to discover how to create a pie chart in PowerPoint, which I'm going to share with you. As you can see, when I had BDD, 90% of my self-identity had to do with what I perceived to be my appearance flaws. And I had a long list of appearance flaws. I also had some things I liked about my appearance. There weren't many, but I did like the color of my eyes. I didn't like the size of my eyes. I thought my eyes were way too small and close together. But I did like the color of my eyes, the kind of hazel, which is a brown-green color. I also really liked the color of my hair. I liked right now, I'm 57, so I have gray hair. So right now I'm simulating the color that my hair used to be. But I really did like my hair and my eyes. I like the color of my hair and my eyes. But 90% of my self-identity was really tied up with what I thought were my appearance flaws, which was having a fat, ugly nose, just really feeling like my skin was awful. I would pick at my skin a lot. And just pretty much, I would always, whenever I left the house, I would be constantly comparing myself to other women and always feeling like I came up short. Other women had, you know, nicer teeth, nicer eyes, a better jawline, better legs, a nicer body shape. Everything, about me didn't seem right when I compared it to other women and when I was out and about. And even when I was, looking at fashion magazines and stuff like that, I could always compare myself to models and find things that I didn't like about my body. I also, however, when I had BDD, I was a very good student. I went to Mount Holyoke College. I was very intelligent and I had boyfriends. I managed an art gallery in Boston for 8 years. My mom and I were very close. She was my best friend, despite a lot of, things I said in terms of my negative core beliefs kind of coming from things he said about me, comparing me to my father. But we were best friends during my 20s. So I had a lot of things that were going for me and a lot of positive things about myself, but they really didn't register. And that's what I wanted to show with this diagram, that really only 10% of how I felt about myself and my self-esteem and self-identity were tied up in everything else about me. Um, and pretty much 90% of how I felt about myself, which, there were times I looked in the mirror and just thought, I hate myself. I just hate myself. And it was easy to say that and to feel that way because I was, staring in the mirror at all these negative things I thought about my appearance. And that just was all consuming for me. And it became, there were a lot of obsessive thoughts I had about my nose, really negative thoughts about myself. And that's pretty much how I felt about myself. 90% was tied up in all those kind of negative appearance flaws that I thought I had. The thing I want to really stress, Sabine Wilhelm talks about this in her book, is it's really important to learn how to be kind to yourself and show yourself self-compassion and kindness. She provides some strategies for doing that, especially when you have BDD and you feel that you're obsessed with your appearance and all the negative things you see in the mirror, which, again, as we learned earlier, people with BDD see things and perceive themselves in ways that other people don't. Our brains tend to magnify our flaws and really hone in on those. And so we see ourselves as a lot worse than anyone else does. So it's important to really start to rebuild your self identity, to think about the things you value in yourself other than your appearance, because there's so much more to us than just what we look like on the outside. These two exercises suggested by Sabine Wilhelm in her book, Feeling Good About the Way You Look, is a good start. Her first suggestion is looking back. So write a letter, and I updated this to, an email or a text to kind of modernize it, to your younger self or your imagined child. Use kind words to provide advice about dealing with the BDD symptoms that you have and how you could overcome those and live a fulfilling life. So again, it's a message of hope to your past self or to your child or imagined child about what it would be like living with the BD symptoms that you have and really giving them words of kindness and compassion. Then the next one that Sabine Wilhelm suggests is looking forward, writing your eulogy. How do you want loved ones to describe you? Imagine at your memorial service that your friends and family and your loved ones are all gathered there together to remember you. What do you want to be remembered for? And just think about what do you want your legacy to be? How do you want your loved ones to remember the impact that you had on them and that you had on their lives? So again, this is a way of getting you to think about your value as a person outside of your appearance. Just really look at your inner core values and what's important to you and the characteristics that you really care about and some of your positive characteristics that you possess. You might be thinking, well, how do I come up with some of these positive characteristics? Well, I will help you to identify some of your character traits that have nothing to do with your appearance. This first exercise was taught to me by a friend of mine who is a life coach. And this is good if you kind of can do a punchline with it. But right now, I'm just going to tell you how to do this exercise. What I want you to do is think about, first of all, a friend or a loved one, or perhaps a friend and a loved one or a family member. And I want you to list about 10 traits, positive traits that you really value in those people in order of importance. And then what I want you to do is to identify kind of where those traits come together. In other words, what traits did you list that are in common? So for me, I listed my best friend, Stephanie, and I listed my mother because they both were women I admire and or admired. My mom has passed away. And there are also, I thought about all the things I valued in the two of them, and I wrote a list. And interestingly enough, there was some overlap between the characteristics that I put down for both of them. So what she told me is that once I identified what those top 3 to 5 personality traits were that they each had in common, that these were the traits or were actually the ones that I had. Because she told me you can't really identify traits in other people that you don't also possess yourself. And for me, that was just kind of whoo, mind blowing because I was like, what? These are characteristics I have, but I just listed them for people I care about. And she's like, no, those are the traits that you really value in yourself, whether you recognize it or not. So I want you to do that exercise if you're having a hard time coming up with your really positive character traits or the things you value in yourself, think about the characteristics of the traits that you value in other people that you care about. So that would be the first way to do it. Now you may be thinking, what are these positive character traits? How can I get a list of them? Well, I'm going to help you out with that. Here is a list in alphabetical order of some positive character traits that you could use to describe your friends, loved ones, or if you're ready, you can just jump right in and think about how they would best describe you. Another thing you could do is think about the voice or the name that you gave the kind voice inside your head to counter the inner critic. How would you describe your inner voice? What personality traits would you attribute to that inner voice, that kind inner voice? That's another way you could do this. So I'm going to just choose probably 3 to 5 as an example and just apply them to myself. The first one I would choose is artistic. The reason I say this is because both my parents were artists. I took art classes in college, and I have since taken oil painting classes, and I really enjoy being creative. Love drawing. I use pastels, I use charcoals. Like I said, I've done some oil painting recently, and I just really enjoy that artistic part of myself. I also feel that I'm very creative. I turned my dissertation into a book, The BDD Family, and I also enjoy writing a lot. So I would say, artistic and creative are 2 traits I really do value in myself. When I was growing up, when I was a child, I was never athletic. I started jogging. They call it jogging back in New England. They call it running here in Colorado. I was not athletic as a child. I was pretty clumsy. I had pretty bad balance. So I would never have considered myself athletic when I was a child or even a teenager. Since I've moved to Colorado, though, I've really started hiking a lot. I started ultra running, which is any distance longer than a marathon. Did a lot of trail running and races. There was a trail run in Colorado, local, that I did. It was a 24-hour trail race, and I actually came in first woman. So that was pretty cool. I didn't expect that. Again, that's a character trait that I'm proud of, but I would have never described myself as athletic when I was a child. So that's kind of new for me. As I mentioned earlier, I always have valued my intelligence. I feel that I'm very intelligent. I did well in school and I was able to complete my dissertation. So I feel like those are examples of my intelligence. I also consider myself fairly persistent. It's hard getting over BDD. It's really hard overcoming. It took me 2 years in therapy and on Prozac, and then it took me another probably 3 years getting at my core issues from my childhood trauma to really get over that. It took me a good 5 years of my life in my 30s to recover from BDD, and that's short compared to some people. It can take a lot longer. So I think persistence is really important to be able to persist and keep going even when it feels difficult. And next week we'll talk about setbacks and it's easy to have setbacks when you're overcoming BDD. So being persistent is really important. I also think I was very serious as a child. I was not a happy-go-lucky child or giggly child. I was very serious. Again, that could go along with BDD because being hypersensitive to criticism, being introverted, being perfectionistic. Those are all traits that go along with people who develop BDD. So serious was certainly something that I was as a child. And I think, definitely trustworthy for people that I love and care about. I really try to show up and be my best and be someone they can depend upon. So, dependable, trustworthy. And dependable is not on the list, but I do want to stress that if there are words that you feel describe you that are not on this list, please go ahead and you can write them down. You don't have to only use the words on this list. This is just kind of a starting point to help you think about some positive character traits. Now, this diagram is another way of thinking about your character traits outside of your appearance. This is by a therapist who treats people with BDD and OCD. He's also someone who had BDD himself. And this is a chart that he showed Chris Tronson at the International OCD Foundation conference in July of 2023. Here are some of his traits that he listed in this chart he showed in terms of who am I? So starting from the top, therapist, advocate, brother, entertainment reporter, friend, uncle, humorous, a colleague, a supportive listener, loyal, honest, and a nephew. That's another way of doing it. As you notice, not all of these are positive character traits per se, but they're aspects of his self-identity that have nothing to do with his appearance. He also offers some advice. If you look in the bottom right, you'll see his tip is if you are having a hard time coming up with a way you positively impact others or important roles you play, ask a friend or loved one. That's another way you could do this exercise. If you have a friend or loved one that you trust, ask him, her, or they what some of your positive character traits are and let them tell you and really take it in. I know it's hard for people with BDD to take compliments, but what you want to do with this exercise is really start thinking about and expanding your self-identity with these character traits that have absolutely nothing to do with your body dysmorphic disorder. So you can really start thinking about yourself in a much more positive, holistic manner. If you're wondering, this is my self-identity after I recovered from BDD. I wanted to contrast it with my identity during BDD while I had body dysmorphic disorder. After I recovered, as you can see, 90% of my self-esteem and my self-identity had to do with my personality, and only 10% is focused on my appearance. Now, when I show this chart, I don't want you to think that 90% of how I feel about myself is all positive personality traits. That's not true. I have things that I need to work on, just like all of us do. But they have to do with my personality, and they have to do with aspects of who I am as a person that have nothing to do with my appearance. So now I can take in the fact that I'm a college professor and the fact that I help people in support groups with body dysmorphic disorder, and that I do coaching, and that I like to exercise, and that I'm in a relationship, and that I'm a good cat mother, and I walk my cat. There's all kinds of parts to my identity that have nothing to do with my appearance, and those are things that I value about myself. Now, one thing that people ask me is when I get over my BDD, does that mean I'm never going to care about my appearance? That I'm going to, walk out of the house looking off, looking like I didn't even care about my appearance? And that's really not true. I want to reassure you that yes, I've recovered from BDD and I still care about my appearance. I put on makeup for our session. I like to be color coordinated. I'm fairly artistic, as I said. So I always like to check the mirror, make sure that my clothes match before I leave the house. So yes, I still do care about my appearance. There's no doubt about it, but I just don't care as much. And I don't spend hours and hours staring at myself in the mirror. When I get ready, I put on some makeup, I put on my clothes, I check to make sure everything looks good, and then I leave the house. I don't really stand there for hours ruminating on what needs to be fixed or ruminating on what's wrong with my appearance anymore. So again, I want to reassure you that yes, when you recover from BDD, you will still care about your appearance. It will simply not take up the amount of time it does now, and you won't agonize about your appearance. You won't hate yourself because of your appearance. And part of what I want you to do with this exercise today and this week is to really think about how can you start expanding your self-identity so it takes in some of these more positive character traits that you possess. So here is your homework. I want you to review your BDD coping skills that you've learned so far during the workshops. There have been, you can go back to workshop 1 all the way through workshop 4 and look at all the coping skills that you learned. I want you to create a list of coping skills that you found most beneficial when you were practicing them. I also would like to know which BDD coping skills did you find not as useful. That helps you to know which ones that you're not going to use going forward, but also it helps me to know which skills that maybe I should focus on more in future workshops and courses. What I want you to do is post at least 5 coping skills that you have found helpful to the Coping with BDD Facebook group for week 5. Now, as a bonus, I want you to provide examples showing how you used coping skills to combat your negative inner critic or your core beliefs. If you did use that positive voice or that positive name for yourself, I'd like to know how did you use that to combat the negative core beliefs that you identified and that negative inner critic voice that you have. That's the homework for this week. Thank you very much.